I want to start off by welcoming everyone. My name is Xiaoan. You can tell I'm representing the Facto Institute, which is a beautiful foundation, Southwest Michigan, Kalamazoo, have an extremely inviting and powerful mission, which is to help build a spiritual foundation for a loving world. However, I'm speaking and welcome you, putting a different hat on. I have been the chairperson for the research committee of Management, Spirituality, and Religion, otherwise we say MSR. It's a special interest group within Academy of Management, the largest professional association in the world, and dealing with primarily practices and theory and research in the field of management and business. It is our honor to create this space for you. I understand, during COVID, we learned how to do virtual meetings, and we also experienced the power of virtual connections if we put our heart, our mind, and everything we have into the space, and the magical happens. Today is such an opportunity. In case you're wondering what MSR is all about, and I'm gonna just copy Management, Spiritual, and Religion's vision into the chat, because that's one of my favorite statement in the world. If you look at the chat area, Management, Spiritual, and Religion vision focus on human flourishing and global consciousness that illuminate and are illuminated by spiritual and religious dimensions of life in management and research and teaching and practice. Is that what you're looking for today and tomorrow? Then you belong here. Or otherwise, as general as possible. When Judy Neal, one of my mentors in the field, she said just 5 minutes ago, say, it's all about love today. Let's be real and bring your best loving heart, your commitment, your struggles, and your blessing into the space. This is the time for all of us. And so I just basically want to welcome you, because my coordinator, one of the best one in the world, Paul Schmidt, gonna tell you the more logistic side of, so you know what you can expect and know where you can find and have support and resources. Paul, please.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and welcome everybody. It's just such a beautiful pleasure to see you all. So many friends, smiling faces from the MSR community, or family, as many of us feel and refer to it, and a really great pleasure to see so many new faces. Delighted to report that we have over 270 registrants. Certainly not expecting everybody to attend every session, of course, but over the next 2 days, we will have something on the order of 250 folks joining us from 35 different countries. And as Joanne mentioned, with the extra challenge of spanning 17 or 18 different time zones. So I will be serving as MC and tech host with the assistance of my colleagues, Stacy Gunther, and also Anita Mendirata and Aditya Agrawal from India will be hosting the Eastern Hemisphere sessions later on today and tomorrow in some places. And our goal with the event is to offer a friendly, informal, open, and generous space so that our presenters can not only deliver their wisdom, but also to engage you with opportunities to share, discover, and capture those new insights that come through this type of work. So here are a few notes for what you can expect and how to best participate. Please maintain your mute button. Understand that we will mute you as needed to keep the background noise respectful and low for presenters, but we cannot unmute you. So should you want to talk, we'll be relying on you to do that yourself. Feel free to come and go from these sessions as you need. It's the same Zoom link for every single session, so keep that handy. And you're free to just stay on as well in between meetings, but understand we'll be putting you in the waiting room in between sessions so we can meet with the presenters and have a last minute prep. Main sessions will be recorded. The mentor sessions and the breakout sessions will not. so you have intimacy, privacy, and confidence in those settings. And we'll be using breakout rooms in many sessions, so please participate. If you run into issues and find yourself alone in a room or having technical difficulties, the best thing to do is to leave the breakout room, not the meeting, and join me back in the main room, and we'll do our best to assist you. So you all probably have gotten many messages from me with the live program link, which does have all the information you need on timing. I have just put that again in the chat. But the program really, over the next 2 days, 33 hours, something like that, 39 hours, really happens in 4 pieces. Today we have our opening foundation for this year's exploration about how scholarly research connects with the urgent need for action in our changing world. That will be 4 sessions, and then following that we'll begin the sort of second phase, which involves a focus on mentoring. And in that session we'll not only be highlighting the best qualities of mentoring, which MSR is stewarding and teaching and practicing, but also get to hear from 7 scholars and the work that they're doing in the context of mentoring. And then we have an Eastern Hemisphere focus with the time zone shifting to a more friendly time of day for our Eastern scholars and participants. That will be 5 sessions, again led by our colleagues Aditya and Anita in India. And then our closing volley of sessions next tomorrow will be really focusing on research methodology teaching. We'll hear from the award winners for MSR dissertation awards this year, and look forward to AOM and next year's work together. So one last detail, if you have not registered, I really encourage you to do so. I'm putting the link in the chat, again, only if you have not registered. And this only because I want to be able to send you a message letting you know when the recorded sessions are available, and I can only do that with folks who've offered their email addresses that way. So with that, I thank you so much for being here. Are there any questions on the technical front at all? Everybody feel comfortable? Excellent. All right, well, reach out to me privately in the chat if you need anything, and I'll do my best. And without further ado, I'll hand it back over to Joanne to introduce our first speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And just to add a little bit for those who are joining us for the first time, you're probably already wondering, and I'd like to know more about MSR, Management, Spirituality, and Religion, and also the research committee. And just so you know, this is our annual research colloquium. We do that normally right before the actual Academy of Management conference, which is going to take place in Seattle this year in the first week of August. And within the MSR field, we are small. We have 500 to 600 members worldwide, some of the best scholars in this field, but we're very robust. We are the one, as you can tell from the mission and vision, is really urging us to ask those deep, big questions in the field of management and business. The questions needs to be asked. What is the purpose of business? What's the role of business supporting the greater good in the world? And when the bottom line is being traditionally valued, and only look at the success to be measured that way, then where is the value of us as humans? Where is the value of communities? Where is the value and the role of faith and spirituality supporting us as human? Therefore, we can wholeheartedly participate in something that is life-giving, that is human and shared flourishing. It's my invitation to invite you into these 2 days to ask those questions. I know you have been wondering those questions. I know you're probably looking for such a community. It is such a good opportunity that you hopefully will feel well connected, because we're all asking the same questions. We do monthly offerings, and also we do our annual meetings, which you are part of it. And with all that being said, we plan this most carefully we invite some of the best minds and hearts in the world to be with us, just to listen what's really the wisdom, the life journey, the spiritual journey they bring to us. We want to start off with the event, normally we call the Keynote Sessions, and you will be pleasantly surprised and deeply impressed by this year's big offering from my dear two colleagues. You may say, okay, Xiaoan, if they are your colleagues, you can be biased. I can be, but after I introduce you, my good friends and brother Bill Vendley and his wonderful colleague Megan Campbell, then you will know what they really have to offer today. I'm gonna, instead of I'm gonna just say how I know brother Bill in the way I understand you. Bill, raise your hand so people can really see you. So Bill came to the Facto Institute in the year of 2019, and he's our vice president of the Shared Sacred Stories, which is a very intriguing name for the title. I don't know if we can find such a title elsewhere. Once again, vice president of the Shared Sacred Stories. And he's the best person for that job. Why? It's because before he came to Facto, he spent about 25 years, a quarter of a century of time, as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace. For people who are active in the world religions field and the world, you will understand this one of the largest multi-religious organizations. In that role, Bill worked extremely closely with religious communities in more than 90 countries. If we have participants from 35 countries today, and Bill has tripled that number, and to mount concrete project really in conflict resolutions, protecting human dignity, and advancing integral human development that honors the full person, the whole person, and also he has a big heart for protecting the earth. In case you'd like to know a little more, how the Bill, before that role, he worked as an advisor to President Obama on the Multi-Religious Cooperation and International Affairs Task Force of the White House Faith-Based Council. He was also advisor to the State Department Secretary of the State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. The list goes long. All I want to say is, it's an honor to have my brother Bill and my dear colleague Bill with us. And equally impressive is our relatively young, but extremely robust and impressive colleague, Megan. Megan is from Western University and Michigan University and joined Facto just for a small number of years, but already leading and working closely with Bill on the Facto's #1 initiative right now, the Shared Sacred Stories. And I don't want to take up too much time, and then let's just go right to brother Bill and Megan, sister, please.
Thank you. So Xiaoan, thank you. And to the whole group gathered, Megan and I are just thrilled to be with you today. We're honored. We know you're in all different time zones, and we just couldn't appreciate it more that you're all here. We understood the theme as transformative mentoring, teaching, and social impact. And it's a brilliant theme, and you're right on the front lines, all of you. And but what we want to do is sort of zoom out a little bit. So let's keep our focus on you in your work as transformative mentoring, your work of teaching, and the irreplaceable social impact that you can have. And let's look at you within our wider human family, and within all the various ways in which our human family is self-organizing, and there are people making commitments in restorative agriculture and in all dimensions of our shared flourishing, people are working. And we're convinced there is a sort of decentered movement that is emerging. But we're also convinced, and we can take heart in this, the problems are large and great, but there are so many good people and so many good organizations. And we are, in a sense, in solidarity with them, but we need a deeper solidarity with them, and they need a deeper solidarity with you. So we imagine together with you that there is an emergent movement And it would invite all of us with our respective gifts and commitments. But that movement we're going to submit needs a story. It needs a shared story. And for us, we're not going to be shy about saying it. It needs a shared sacred story that could contain and honor everybody and their differences and allow us all to play our small parts, but as a profoundly interconnected human family. So what I'd like to do for just about 10 minutes less is to sort of think together about this prospect of story and how the very commitments that you have fit within this story framework, and how we're all in the process of trying to honor our diversities and yet find, it's not something we're just cooking up, discern a shared sacred story that can assist us all to be the human family we're called to be. So I begin with a little reflection on story as foundation, and I'm going to begin with a pithy quote. It's from a wonderful writer by the name of Joan Didion, and a book that she wrote called The White Album. And Joan Didion writes as follows: "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." Now, it's just so rich, I need to repeat it. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. It's that vital. Story is right at the heart of who we really are. We are, so to speak, story bound. We don't get out of our story. We ponder, we wonder, we perceive, we feel, we imagine, we think, we choose, we act within our stories. We are always, so to speak, within a story, and in that sense, we're always story bound. Now, I want to ask you to imagine with me that you and somebody else in this Zoom room find yourself coincidentally on a long journey, and you're seated beside each other. You don't know each other, so you're seated on a long journey. And of course, you exchange pleasantries. Maybe that deepens if you feel a resonance. You talk about some topics or some issues, but the minutes tick on. The journey is only beginning. You pause into silence at times, but you resume, and gradually you find, inevitably, whether you call it that or not, you're starting to share your story. You may not have framed it as a story, but in fact, each of you, if you're really beginning to connect with each other, are sharing your story. So what are our stories but the deepest understandings of who we are experiencing ourselves to be? Where did we come from? Where are we going? What are we challenged with? How will we overcome that? How will we remain true to what our understanding of our story is? So one way or the other, you and the party next to you, if the resonances just work out, will inevitably find yourselves sharing parts of your respective stories, because that's how we understand who we are, and that's how we share ourselves, maybe at the deepest level. I had another little point. I mentioned that we are story bound in the sense that we're always in a story. We're always thinking, perceiving, feeling, judging, acting, and so forth in a story, but in another very mysterious way that this group in particular can really resonate with. We are story beyond. We tell our story somehow from beyond our story. We know it. We know this because we change our story. If we were just story bound, we wouldn't be able to get out of our story or change our story. But in fact, the very possibility of telling a story is that we are somehow simultaneously beyond our story, maybe the religious word for that is that we're before a mystery that we experience as sacred, or a technical word is that we are open in transcendence. And that's the very possibility of telling our story, and certainly of changing our story. So we're both story bound and story beyond. And in this session, we're going to invite you to reflect, ultimately helping us to move together towards the possibility of a true and authentic shared sacred story. But we ask you to use your story. Stay close to it. It's your primary resource. If we each have a personal story, and we're always in the middle of it, it's still out, we're always wondering where we came from and where we're headed. We also story in multiple levels, and you know this. Your stories intersect with so many other stories. Many of them are bigger stories. Perhaps a religious story, that story that's gone on across generations, fecund, ever unfolding, ever anchoring people. Certainly you're part of a cultural story. You're part of a national story. You're perhaps part of a local story, or a regional story, or village story. The permutations are endless. So we story at many, many levels, and these are interactive within us in our personal stories. We have also, and this draws us a little closer to the work we can do today, we have also what we could call a de facto public story. This is the story told in our public institutions. It's told at the UN, it's told in our secular governments, it's told in our public presses. This is the story that is increasingly reigning as a de facto public story. In a sense, it's like a personal story. It's a story of who we think we are as a human family. We want, and you're the right group, to discern this public story. Fundamentally, we need to ask, is it a fully good one? Is it fully adequate? Is it spacious so that it doesn't squeeze me and alienate me from myself? Does it really describe who we are as a human family? And perhaps do we need a better public story so that we might all live better together? Now, to get at this, we've got a series of questions. And in every one of these questions, we invite you to hearken back to your own story as your base. And we're going to invite you and we're going to have to leap right in here. We're going to invite you in groups to reflect on the strengths, yes, but especially the limits of what I've called our public story. That's the modern, secular, often scientific story. And we want to then, at the next level, invite you to discern the dissonance between that public story and your personal story. When I say dissonance, where is that jacket too tight? Where does it squeeze you? Where is that public story either reductive or too narrow, doesn't allow your full experience as a person and the other stories that are so precious to you? Third, we want to discern together if there is a possibility of an honest, deeply honest, emergent, shared sacred story. This would be a story that honors the diversity of the world's religions, doesn't replace their sacred stories and other people's life stamp stories, but would live simultaneously. We'd have to have our range of very personal and other stories we subscribe to, but could we imagine a shared sacred story that would, which would be, like all stories, tell us who we are as a human family? And then a fourth question is, how could such a shared sacred story support our shared flourishing, a comprehensive notion of flourishing. I can conclude at this point, and will soon turn us over into the very, very good hands of my colleague, Megan. But I want to be very transparent and share that Fetzer is convinced that there is the possibility of looking back to the full human family's sacred stories. We begin to tell sacred stories from the very first human conversation that marked our human family up to the present moment, and scientific modes of inquiry, that these could be brought together and that we could find a way to honestly begin to tell a shared sacred story, and that shared sacred story could help serve the movement that we are all part of, and it would support you in your transformative mentoring, you in your teaching, you in your social impact, and offer to you solidarity with the men and women around the world, many of them, most of them working in different fields, but equally animated to live an honest, true story for the human family that would take us in solidarity and love for our shared flourishing. So that's the little game plan, and you're already equipped because you have a story. And with that, and with deep gratitude for your attention and Shawan, your extraordinary generosity and introduction, let me turn it over to my colleague, Megan Campbell. So Megan, please help us.
Thanks so much, Bill, and greetings all. I just want to take a moment and look at all of your faces. Welcome. It's so good to see each of you. Bill and I thought we could spend the whole time together speaking at you, but what a waste when there's such collective wisdom in this space. And so our hope is that the rest of this session is interactive. And I want to just say that, permission to engage at the level of interaction that you feel comfortable with this morning, this afternoon, this evening. I recognize that many folks are joining from various time zones. And so be as present as you're able to today, with permission to step back if you need to. As Bill mentioned, we'll be engaging with these 4 questions that he named around public story, and really thinking about how this intersects and shows up in your work, how it shows up in your personal story, how it shows up in your family or community stories. And so we'll be spending time in small groups engaging around those 4 questions. The first question, I'm going to share my screen here, is really around the strengths and limits of our public story. What are the strengths and limitations of our public story? We'll be breaking up into groups of 4 to 6 individuals and speaking about this question together. I invite you first to introduce yourself to your group members. Perhaps you'll be in a group with folks you know, or others you don't know. So take time to introduce yourselves, and then spend time on this question. What are the strengths and limitations of our public story? Our hope is to really hear from the collective wisdom in this room. And so to help us to do so, we'll be using a resource called Jamboard. Some of you may be familiar with it. Oh, and I'm seeing questions in the chat already, which is wonderful. Thank you for being with us this morning. So we'll be using this resource called Jamboard. And I invite you with your group members, whatever, little takeaways arise from your conversation, maybe they're questions or distilled synthesis, whatever you want to share. If you'll put those up on the Jamboard, I'll share that link in the chat really quickly. And I'm also going to share my screen just briefly for a small tutorial. Let me do this one more time. So when you click this link, you'll join our Jamboard here, and you'll see on the left-hand side this toolbar there's a sticky note function. So you'll click that sticky note and add your comments there. Maybe you elect the most tech savvy person in your group to put the sticky notes on, or each of you might add your own sticky note. And I see folks are already accessing the Jamboard, which is great. So with that, we will send you into breakout groups to discuss for around 10 minutes. And Bill, yes, did you want to?
Just before we go, I noticed in the chat, Megan, it would have been hard for you to notice it. There was a wonderful question. What do we mean by our public story? Is that, for example, the MSR story? So the answer is no. We're talking about the story that you'll see on the nightly news, what's embedded in the nightly news, in your newspapers, in your public institutions. So what is the modern, it's increasingly a modern story. It's a very much science story, rather objective story. So what we mean by our public story is the story that's increasingly the global story, profoundly informed by science. And the question is, where is it? It's got a lot of strengths, but where does it have weaknesses to the richness of your own personal story? That just gets us going. And so it's the big story that's out in the world that's if I read the newspapers in India and I read the newspapers in New York, I notice differences, but I notice a lot of similarities. And that's because there's a public story that's emergent there. Is it an adequate one is our question. Thanks, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And I think that question too, you might even start in your group by naming, what are those stories?
Yeah.
What are those public stories? Start there and then get into what are the limits and strengths of it. And I just put this in the chat. We'll be working with slides 1 and 2 on the Jamboard. One says strengths and one says limits. So for you to post some thoughts there. And with that, I think, Paul, we are all set to go in our groups for around 10 minutes.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, we are just putting the finishing touches on things. So I am sending you off to breakouts for 10 minutes. I will beam in and give you a halfway done message, and enjoy your breakouts. Hello, Ramya and Soumya. Are you there? Are people having troubles joining the rooms? There we go.
Waiting for folks to come back from their rooms. They'll be here momentarily, so welcome back.
All right, I believe everybody's back, Megan.
Thank you, Paul. Great. Thanks so much for your participation there. I'm just going to share my screen and let's take a look at this Jamboard together. When we were kind of watching this come together, and Sean says the Jamboard is getting jammed because of all of the good data. Can you all see my screen okay? Yes, wonderful. I love this. This is great. And feel free to drop, any thoughts in the chat that kind of came up for you that weren't able to get captured on the Jamboard. We want to know how this was for you. Was this hard to answer? Did the conversation flow in your group? So some of the strengths of our public story, and we have here on this slide sort of a mix of strengths and limits. So it looks like someone so wonderfully put the strengths on the side here. So one of the strengths is that the news connects us more globally, helps us to choose and think from other perspectives. The story informs us. We want to hear it. We hear it and we want to do something. We're able to read public comments and share unshared stories that adds richness and greater understanding of diverse views. And another strength, knowing more about what's going on in the world, that helps us and allows us to be aware and help more people. And some of the limits, we see a lot more limits and some of the limitations named here. A story of have and have nots. There's an economic story. There's a social media and the ills of alienation of people. There's confusion between opinions and facts. There's a story of wealth and income, sustainability, us versus them, and interconnectedness.
No, you got it wrong.
So what great data we have here. And I'm just going to jump to the second slide. So some more limits here, increasing divisions and stark inequalities. And so you lifted a lot of different strengths and limits in your group. And I'm seeing from the chat that we were able to just scratch the surface. So just scratch the surface with that conversation. We're going to move into another inquiry together now. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Bill.
Thank you, Megan, and congratulations, everybody, on deep reflections and reflections that came just amazingly quickly and with penetrating sensitivity. We want to continue it now. The original question, the way I wrote it, or we read it, was to identify the dissonance between the public story and our personal story. And you state this either negatively or positively, using your deepest sense of your own story rather. Where is the public story too narrow? How does that public story need to become more spacious in order to both honor you, but honor you in your radical relatedness to all of reality, to all of the persons, to societies, and to what we call the natural world, but a universe that's saturated in mysterious beauty that many of us see as a reflection of the sacred. So go back now and staying very close to your own personal story, and having just shared about sort of particularly the limits of the public story, let's identify the way the public story needs to be enriched. So you can translate the dissonance question into a constructive question. What needs to be there for a more full, more generous, more inclusive public story? So that's the task at hand, is to brainstorm together on a story. Because remember, as I shared, and then we'll go right to this, story tells us who we are. A shared story tells us who we are as a human family. So we need a shared story that is open to the deepest mystery, the deepest relatedness to who we are as a human family. So use your own story now to help us think about how to enlarge our public story. So good luck.
So as Bill said, we'll be heading into the breakout rooms again, and we'll be spending again 10 minutes in those rooms. We'll be utilizing the Jamboard, speaking to how this dissonance, what is the dissonance between our public story and your personal story? And I think some folks have just joined us as well, so welcome. And I just want to give a little note that we are entering another time of breakout rooms, and we'll be spending our conversation really in this inquiry around public story. So what is the dissonance between our public story and your personal story? And Paul, we'll do 10 minutes again. And for those using the Jamboard, we're working on slide 3. So you'll use the arrows to toggle to slide 3. What is the distance between our public story and your personal story?
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everybody. I put links to the Jamboard and the question in the chat. Here we go for 10 more minutes. Enjoy. We'll see you soon.
Nearly everyone, and we were just remarking that we know that when you stay in the breakout room for the total amount of time, that means the conversation is good. And I always wish that Zoom would create a feature where you could decline returning to the main room so that I could stay with my breakout room conversation partners. So
that would cause some problems, Megan.
yes, that would cause some problems on our side, but that's a wish. And thank you for that feedback, Damon. I think that 10 minutes wasn't quite long enough, and we'll be opening in a little bit here some time for large group discussion. So, hopefully some of those early thoughts where you just scratched the surface or planted some seeds of conversation, we'll get to tend to those together. Let me share my screen again, and let's just look at what was lifted up in your conversations through the Jamboard.
Wow.
Are you all seeing my screen all right? Yes. So what is the dissonance, or what are the dissonances, plural here, between our public story and your personal story? Not ethical or moral. Globalization is a myth. Values. In stories, you can be on the power side or the disempowered side. Connection in personal story versus public loneliness and alienation. Relevance to me, not focused on uplifting the poor. Again, this lack of connection with others in the public story. Dissonance related to polarization. And the impact of the personal story and public story could be different. There's so much here around these dissonances. We're now going to enter a time of the third inquiry, we spoke to. And again, if you have any thoughts that didn't make it on the Jamboard and want to put those in the chat, we welcome you. And I also wanted to say that we will share the Jamboard out after the session. So in some way you will receive the notes that were collected here on the Jamboard and shared out from your group. So with that, I'll pass it to Bill to lead us through this third question.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and for all the groups and the reflections. Zoom doesn't let us simultaneously look at each other and the Jamboard, but there was so much on the Jamboard and that we're noting, you might say, dissonances or limitations in the sort of increasingly de facto public story, so that so those dissonances, those limitations, the ways we feel a little bit squeezed, a little bit alienated, a little bit privatized, where we can't be our full spacious relational selves and relational in across the full community of being, are in their own ways invitations to us to do, all of us together, our own parts in helping to build this slide raises it as is there a possibility of a shared sacred story? And here, just impossible for me to be synthetic in terms of the Jamboard, but just catching a number of points. There were notes about that were ultimately affirming the genius of the scientific mode of inquiry. And so if there's going to be a shared sacred story, it's going to have to open itself to that profound intelligibility that comes from the scientific mode of understanding. Many of the notes in the Jamboard spoke more explicitly about the spiritual mode of understanding. So is there such a shared sacred story is going to, if it's going to make space for our spiritual mode of inquiry, and we've been engaged in that mode of inquiry and are still engaged in it from our origins, but that's given us plural experiences of sacred mystery, plural sacred stories. So how are we, or can we, I guess, or is our time inviting us each in our own ways and every group in its way to begin to contribute to this possibility of a full relational shared sacred story, one, as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't dishonor particular sacred stories. We have living today men and women with indigenous spiritualities that, as far as we know, were our first form as a human family of spiritual inquiry. And these are still live, living stories for the indigenous community. And the question that we're asking ourselves is, how can the indigenous stories help all of us, particularly indigenous peoples, to a kind of solidarity in love for our shared flourishing? But that's true of Hinduism. So we have work afoot inviting scholar practitioners from the Hindu tradition to faithfully and honestly, but creatively retell the large story of Hinduism to all of us, for how it can assist all of us, and particularly Hindus, to have embraced their stories, but how they would bring them to a solidarity and love for shared flourishing, and so on with the other traditions: Buddhism, Confucianism, Sikhs, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, Confucianists, and others. So everybody invited to marshal what might be called our spiritual civilizational wealth in the area of the spiritual mode of understanding, and making that re-available to us as a human family in the most respectful, honest ways, respecting pluralism, but how these are stories that ultimately could guide us, each community in its own way, each community respecting its own sacred story, to a story of solidarity in love for shared flourishing. Meanwhile, very much grateful for the comment that I saw on the board on science. There's a transformation afoot within science. The deepest reflections in science are raising questions, discovering data that don't fit within an overly reductive scientific story. That science is a more open-ended inquiry. It presumes the profound intelligibility of reality. And these presumptions in science are starting to rise to the surface of scientific reflection itself. So our question is whether we are at a point in our civilization where we can be wise enough to honor all of what should enter into a shared sacred story, that such a shared sacred story would allow each religious community's story to be the way it arrives to a solidarity and love, So could we imagine a shared sacred story of solidarity in love? Other traditions have cognate terms to the word love, and let each go to their most deepest terms of unrestricted compassion, or whatever their language may be. But can we do that? And if we could do that, can that help us to have a story of who we are called to be as a human family? Such a story could abide us, and we could still have all sorts of sub-stories and so forth, and those would be necessary. But that, it seems to us, is a way, as I began saying, that we were focusing on your transformative mentoring, your teaching, and your social impact. But how would we situate that within what could be called an emerging shared sacred story? So with that, I'd simply like to open it up, not go back into small groups, and just invite us to reflect on this prospect from each of our perspectives, or inviting anybody who would welcome reflecting. The premise here is that your personal stories would be respected. Your cultural stories would be stories that would take us to solidarity. Certainly your religious stories would be stories that would take us to a solidarity in love, and that solidarity and love would ground us in action, ground us for action, and for something that we're calling shared flourishing. And we'll talk about that as we get towards the end of this session. So wide open. Let's everybody is invited. This is a huge and weighty topic, and we'll be with it for the rest of our lives. So I heartily invite us just to share as we feel called.
Feel free to raise your digital Zoom hand via the reactions button in the bottom of your window. If that is challenging, you can drop a period, a single dot into the chat, and we will notice that. And if all of that fails, wave your hands wildly and we'll do our best to find you. Thank you. Or just speak up.
Or for maybe some of the introverts in the room, drop it in the chat and we'll read it aloud for you. So we still love your voice in here, even if it's through a chat comment. So we had some, I see, is it Janelle? Is that how you say your name, or Janelle? I see you've raised your hand first.
Hello, it's Janelle, and let me lower my hand and say hi to Tanya. Hello, who's going to be next? This is so tricky. I was just chatting with another colleague, in the sidebar chat about this. If the sacred is what we hold with reverence, if we strip any religious or references to God, right? Keep it down to what is it that we're holding with reverence, then there are tons of tribal sacred stories.
Yes, of course.
And it seems like there are few universal sacred stories, beyond the story of love. I think that's one that there's a lot of consistency across tribes, if you will. Bringing that together. And at the same time, it raises the question of there are sacred stories we believe, and there are sacred stories we live by. And they don't always go together. And so I'm just going to put that out on the table. And I want to acknowledge how complex and tricky this conversation is, and express my gratitude to Megan and Bill, to you, for creating the space for this.
Janelle, thank you so much. You're exactly right. This is sensitive work. And it invites us all to help each other to raise our sensitivities. So you've just done that. So thank you. So Megan, their hands up there. I'll leave it to you.
Yes, I believe the second hand was Tianyan, and please correct me if I've mispronounced your name.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. You are correct. I'm Tianyuan. So my input here is in many public stories, I see anger, maybe righteous anger, like the Black Lives Matter movement and the indigenous history, the residential school scandals. There are so many anger and hatred and unhealed trauma and the polarization. I see the abortion case in the United States, or other scandals. So in all these public stories, I see the dualistic thinking prevail, that people have to choose one side. And if someone is a perpetrator, then this one is by all means a devil, a bad guy, and they should be, no matter what they did, should be, no matter what, maybe some good things they have done, they will be condemned. From so at first people just pedestal. That's I cannot remember the word pedestal or pedestal. Someone just like the cancel culture, consider them as evil. So these are all dualistic thinking, and I want to introduce the Buddhist notion of non-duality, that human nature in itself is non-dual, that people can be both angels and devils, or neither angel nor devil, but just a human being. And sometimes we may not have to choose side, but to see both sides, to see both the reasons for both sides. So that's the thing I think of, the non-duality, non-dual thinking.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's there are not just Buddhism, but there are other traditions that have non-dual approaches. And so a shared sacred story is going to have the space for non-dual thinking, and there'll be people who continue to feel in a more dual way of approaching. So we have to navigate that with extreme sensitivity. It's back to Janelle's comments about this is not a light matter, this is a sophisticated, sensitive matter. And you're just further underlining that Fetzer's privileged to say that we have teams of practitioners from all of these traditions, and they're interacting with each other and trying to be very faithful to their respective views, but still seeing whether we could find an expression of a shared sacred story that allows for that pluralism to be present within the story, pluralism of views, still getting us to solidarity and love. So that's what we're striving for. But thanks very much. You're absolutely very vital input. Thank you.
I just quickly want to draw everyone's attention to the great conversation happening in the chat. So if you have a moment to read through some of the conversations there, please do. And I believe the next hand was Jerry, and I apologize if I've lost the order of hand raising at this point, but I believe the next hand was Jerry.
So can you all hear me? Okay, good. My first reaction is there's always hope. There's always a possibility. So then the question becomes, what interferes with, or what could help the possibility? And I just wanted to introduce into the discussion the idea of levels of consciousness, because everybody's story is sacred to themselves, and every tribe has a story that's sacred to the tribe. and every group has a story that's sacred to the group. And this is where levels of consciousness comes in. I'm thinking in terms of, Wilbur talking about it, or spiral dynamics, or any of those things. It's not until you get to 3 or 4 levels up when each group can start to see, oh yeah, I can see this in all the other groups. And what's happening, just looking at the United States and other places, most of us are not there yet. I know, I don't know what the percentage is, but the level of, I think it's like right now might be 10 or 20% less than that of the population is at a level where it can really start to see these things in the other groups. So the question becomes, how do you raise levels of consciousness? And so I think there's always a possibility that the levels of consciousness can be raised, but there's also especially media, social media likes to talk to the lowest level of consciousness and likes to get people upset. And so a lot of what we're doing never makes it to the, never makes it out there to the press or anywhere else. And so people just like to stay upset and stay in lower levels of consciousness.
Very helpful, Jerry. Thank you.
I see we're drawing very close to the end of our time together, so perhaps we have time for just one more comment, and then we'll end with just a couple minutes of remarks. So Eric, you are the next hand in line there.
Appreciate your bringing it to a close that way. I've been through a shared story of science. That's where I began, and I moved into the shared story of environment and change. I've been through the story of spirituality and a larger worldview and a consciousness worldview. And what I'm realizing is that I don't find agreement among any of those stories among a large number of people, because each has a different worldview. And what I want to offer is the idea that shared sacred story is about bringing the sacred to each story, perhaps. Is that in the great respect and reverence, if we can hear each other's stories, small or large, with that reverence, with that compassion, with that open-heartedness to say, I really want to hear your heart and your story, that perhaps we meet the shared by bringing the sacred to each person's story. That certainly helped me, even as recently as a conversation last night where my brother was expressing a worldview different from my own. And it was only by saying, can I hear him, that I said, he's got a different story, but I can feel the sacred in listening to where he is.
Yeah. Terrific, Eric. Thank you.
Yes, I would like just to add that the ability to hear depends on, our willingness to love. So I think that's the starting point, because, if we have to talk between different levels of consciousness, it's always very complex, because even though those who do not share our level of consciousness might not just not understand or not just open to, it's not because they don't want it, they are not just able to understand certain things that we already understand. So I think if we start from the love, just the intentional love, maybe that will change something first on personal level, and that will be shared on collective level.
Thank you so much. That's a great comment to sort of conclude our large group discussion. I know there were a couple of hands raised that we didn't get to hear from, and I encourage you to please put your thoughts in the chat to make sure that we have those. I haven't been able to fully keep the chat conversation. There's just been so many comments coming through, which is amazing. So we really look forward to reading those even after the session. So with that, Bill, I'll turn it to you to conclude us for our time together.
Well, thank you. First of all, just a huge thanks to everyone. We've just opened the, just opened the lid of the jar. This is a big work that is a civilizational work for all of us. We began by reflecting that story is the best way we can express who we are, even in our very unfinished state. story holds us there. And that something like a shared sacred story would try to hold us as a human family in our diversity, in our plurality, plural experiences of the sacred, plural experiences of goodness, and so forth. So such a shared sacred story would have to be a kind of polyphonic story. And many here have already come to it in their own particular formulations. It would be a story that would recognize that different people get to a solidarity and love through their own traditions, their own heritage, their own experiences. And ultimately that story could be a story of solidarity and love, but love for a comprehensive relational flourishing across the community of being. We're persons, but we're always in society. We've always been social. Do we have good societies? How would a story help us to build that relationship of transforming ourselves, becoming the people we're called to be, building the societies? We live on an earth that's saturated with beauty, sacred beauty. How would that story call us to care for that? Those three partners, so to speak, persons and societies, the natural world, all before the mystery of existence, the shared, the sacred mystery rather. So that story is we're trying to find our way to tell that story. And we're going to be spending our lives trying to do this, if we could find that story, begin to iterate that story, then it would frame MSR's work in the larger story of our human family, the solidarity that our human family needs, where 1,000 gifts are united in its spacious and generous story that isn't a tight, alienating story, but is a story of our radical relationality with each other, with our societies that are to be built as good, and with the natural world, all of us before a mystery, and there are multiple languages for that mystery, and we call it sacred. So that's what we wanted to share from our side, and we knew that you'd already be far along in your own ways, and indeed you are in this conversation. So Megan, would you offer your words of thanks? Those are mine. So thank you, everybody. And Megan, could I offer you a spot to just say
thank you for your presence today. This has been so enriching for us and to interact with you and to see you. So thank you so much. And we realize that we have just, again, touched the surface of these questions and of this inquiry. So thanks for joining with us. And we hope that the rest of your time together is wonderful.
Joanne, thank you. And to MSR, congratulations. Thank you.
Bill and Megan, thank you so much. And thank you, Joanne. What a beautiful way to kick things off. I know we're a few minutes past the scheduled time, so don't feel any trouble in dropping off if you need to be somewhere else. I'll take just a couple of minutes and wrap things up, tee them up for the next session here. But gosh, what a beautiful session. Iterating our stories, realizing our stories. What I'm left with is understanding that our story already comes from what is bigger than us. You know, perhaps it's already shared and we're just perceiving it and opening to new versions of it rather than thinking that we're the source of it or the generating factor. So you may ask, this is a research colloquium. Why are we talking about this stuff? I just want to address that, and I'll say, you know, what value does our research have if it's not connected with our deepest perceptions and our deepest values? Scholarly study is such a personal thing, and it's such an intimate thing, and it's such a significant endeavor in one's life. So with MSR and this community, we feel taking time to connect your work with, in this case, our stories, is germane to doing your best work. So I hope you find this valuable. We'll have more at the end of the next half hour in your world. In about 26 minutes, we'll have more opportunity to reflect on story from hearing from Jody Fry and the perspective and arc of his personal and professional journey and how he's channeled his purpose through that. And hopefully we'll be able to experience that session in a way that helps you reflect on your own journey, wherever you are on that path, and where you're headed, where you've come from, and why it matters, and how we can all be together in that journey. So with that, I will close this session. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you again, Bill and Joanne and Megan, and the generosity of the Fetzer Institute, who has also sponsored this event and been able to make it free for everybody here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Feel free to just leave the Zoom room open. We will put you back in the waiting room and bring you back at the top of the next session. Thank you so much, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Great start, Paul. Thank you, and all of the good effort from the team. And I do hope there's a possibility, maybe before Jody's